Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests of all ages. Welcome to the opening night event of the 8th Annual Oakville Film Festival, presented by OFFA, the Oakville Festivals of Film and Art. We are so glad that you are here joining us tonight for the first of 7 days of our longest festival ever. My name is Tyler Collins. I'm one of the co-hosts and mediator for this evening's event and through the entire festival. I also work as the arts reporter for Oakville News and oakvillenews.org. You can read us for free every morning on oakvillenews.org. I'm joined tonight by the executive director of OFFA, Wendy Donnan. And
Hi,
back in the nook, we have our friend Tori Nixon, who is working behind the scenes to make tonight happen. But also making tonight happen is CHCH, who is our sponsor for tonight's ticket. We are grateful for their support of tonight's festival. Now, if you're watching this live Q&A, you have just finished seeing our opening night film, Marlene. We've had a fabulous time programming this movie, and we were so excited to bring it to you. Now it is time for the live Q&A with some of the cast, crew, and the real-life people who were part of this true Canadian story. We are so fortunate tonight to have our friends Wendy Hill-Tout, who was the writer, director, and producer of the film.
Hi, nice to meet everybody.
We also have star Kristen Booth, who played Marlene Truscott. And tonight we are also extremely honored to be joined by two people who were there for the real life events through so many years. First, we are joined tonight by the counsel, James Lockyer, who was on the case when Steven Truscott was cleared in 2007, joining us live tonight.
Hi, how are you?
And lastly, we have Marlene and Steven Truscott's real-life son, Ryan Truscott, joining us on the call tonight as well to talk about the real-life events.
Hi, everyone.
So for tonight's live Q&A, the best part about it is we are live. That means we're having a real-time conversation that you are watching, and you, the audience, can ask questions to us. To do that, there is a chat feature on Eventive right here on the right side of your screen. Go ahead and fill out a question on the top, and when it gets linked in here, it will be sent to us so we can send in questions to our four guests for you to answer. All you have to do, write your questions in on the right-hand side of the screen right here, and they'll get connected to us here on the panel. To get things started, though, let's talk with you, Wendy. You played several roles in the film. Both from the writing of the screenplay to leading the production right from start to finish. How did you start approaching this true story and turning it from Canadian history into film?
Well, it was overwhelming because there was so much material. I mean, you could probably do a miniseries just on the trial alone. So I think that was fairly daunting, just reading the research part of it. And, we spent I had a co-writer on it, Kathy Osler, and we spent, I would say, 6 or 7 years actually writing the script. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it
6 or 7 years.
It wasn't straight through because I'm also producing a lot too. We would work in pockets on it, but it just took so much because even it was based also on, on Marlene's life rights and her story for sure. But as research, we used Julian Scheer's book, and it's mammoth. Like, there's just so much to tell. So I think the hardest thing was trying to figure out what was going to be in the film in the end, like what were going to be the scenes. And we did different drafts of it, making this film to come up with the final product.
So how did you choose the scenes that were going to be the most important and put into the movie?
That's a good question. I think in the end, we focused on Marlene. I think there were times when we had a lot more on Steven in the film. But we gradually kept honing and ended up, it was Marlene's story we wanted to tell. But secondly, we realized that we had to go for the emotion. We had to find the emotional story behind the facts because there's so many facts. We had to pick out which facts were going to be in it. Like, that was the hardest thing. Like, we've got certain things like the car that was in the field that night, and the farmer that saw it and all that kind of stuff. But there are so many facts. There are so many facts, and you can't make a movie that's about facts. So I think the hardest thing was figuring out how many facts, what are the ones we're going to pick to show in this film about his case, and then finding the emotional journey of this remarkable woman.
I want to come back to the emotional journey and choosing the scenes, but you're talking about all the facts that were both about the story and part of the story, right? Because following the plot, including following the case and the investigation, means keeping all these facts straight. So let's talk with Kristen next. Kristen, tell us about the preparation of learning all the facts and details of this story and how you could portray that on camera. How do you make all these facts clear to the audience?
Well, I started by reading as much as I possibly could. So I read Julian's book. I read another book. I can't remember the name of it at the moment. And then I, scoured the internet for information as well. And then I had the honor of speaking with both Steven and Marlene at their house before shooting. So I'm not going to lie, it was a lot. But, we were a team, and we had so many people who knew the story helping to keep me on track as well. So yeah, it was a lot of dates and information. And it was spanning 40 years. So
it's a common thing in history movies for the actors to meet their real life counterparts if they're given the opportunity. So, but every story of meeting them is different. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about that experience of going to the Truscott home and meeting the real life Marlene and Steven?
It was just such a privilege for me to be able to go and meet them and sit with them and eat lemon tarts with them. And, I said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? I had some things that I wanted to ask that I knew that this meeting would help with. And so I asked a bunch of questions, and Marlene then took me through her basement and showed me some of the boxes she still has that she had gone through of the files. And she took me through a couple of the other rooms with family photos. And it was just so informative for me to be able to be in their home and feel their energy. And
what the most insightful thing you learned from that visit was?
Just watching Marlene. She's a Spitfire. She is a spirited woman, and you can see within minutes of meeting her passion for life, and therefore passion for justice and making this happen for Steven.
Now, on the opposite side, I'm imagining it's also quite an experience for a real life person to meet an actor who's then going to play them in a movie. So I'm curious, Ryan, have you talked with your parents at all what the experience was like for them watching themselves in a film played by actors?
I think that they really wanted to, there was this one opportunity to tell this story, and it was so important because it's such a big case in Canadian history. And then to have, you sort of put your own reputation in the hands of somebody else and pray that, it's great. And we certainly weren't disappointed at all. It was incredible. I remember watching the director's cut with my parents, and the whole time watching, do I watch them or watch the screen, watch them or watch the screen, and couldn't sort of decide. It's the same thing I'd gone through with my dad in his Fifth Estate program, because you kind of watch it and you want to know it because it's history. And they were just so passionate about how wonderful they felt that it portrayed them. And so that it was the right thing. And I've sort of connected online a little bit with Kristen. I've told her many, many times that I think that this is it was like a match made in heaven for them. And just to see how peaceful my mom is about it. And, they both kind of, they're much older now. They're in their, late 70s. And this is something to sort of be their swan song as they sort of go off into private life now.
So what was the experience like for you as their son to see this happening? What was it like for you watching it as a movie?
It's tough. I think that it's a very difficult thing, as James can attest to. When you're living this Canadian big thing, it kind of gets surreal at times. You definitely sort of get swept up in everything, and it's it's a lot. You get watching, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh right, that's my grandmother. And that's how I found out when I was younger, because I found the book in the library at school and was like flipping through and was like, that's really interesting. Oh wait, there's grandma, and you sort of forget at times that you are actually that person. And I think it's harder for the people sort of that our spouses, my sister and my brother and I, and our spouses that didn't kind of live it and they sort of came in later in life. It's a little bit harder for them to kind of grasp it all. But I think it's a really important story. I think my dad's story has always been the one that's been out and been told. And I think it's nice to have my mom that, worked very hard to help him to have her story told as well.
I want to come back to this point of view as well, but I want to go back to, we were talking earlier about choosing what specific scenes that we were using in here. One of the big differences, because this is Marlene's story and not your father's, there are no courtroom scenes in the whole film. There's nothing at a trial in a courthouse. I thought that was very clearly chosen, that it wasn't part of it at all. So I'm curious to hear from anybody, but maybe especially you, Wendy. What was it like making the choice to avoid the courtroom as a setting?
Yeah, and there were multiple drafts, and it was an evolution writing the script. But we started at one time with the courtroom where he's sentenced to be hung. It's very dramatic, but somewhere along the way, we realized we can't tell every story. That's such an amazing story, all of the court stuff. We didn't even get into a lot of what James did because there's so much. We had to just say, we're telling one story over and over. And Kathy and I talked about that a lot. Like, this has to be about character. It has to be about Marlene's character. And again, her emotional journey, or this film is not going to work. And I hope and I think that we achieve that.
If you put it in the courtroom, it's not about Marlene, it's about Steven. And so I think they did the right choice about it. And I think bringing James in at our house, James was at our house a lot. So, that's very truthful. It was many days in the living room with James. So it wasn't all just about the courtroom.
Now, of course, James, you were there in real life, both in the courtroom and in the home. What was the experience like for you? I think it's been a lot more publicized seeing your work in court. What was it like seeing your work inside their home, working directly with Steven and Marlene, put on camera?
Well, I remember it well. I remember the day I met Steven and Marlene. It was in August of 1997. And I went down to their home in Guelph, where they were living then. And in fact, Steven was living under an assumed name at the time. He wasn't under the name Steven Truscott.
He was under the name Steven Johnson, yes?
No, Stephen Bowers.
Oh. Was
actually the name that he was using at the time. I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, Ryan. It's a long time ago now. And I remember that, Steven and I, you portrayed the conversation that he and I had early on, where we talked about the DNA. I actually was portrayed quite rightly, telling him that I was quite sure we would get DNA results from Lynn Harper's body, that they would have preserved the DNA. And that whoever did it would be identified through it. And if it's you, Mr. Truscott, because it's the first day I met him, then the last thing you want is for me to find the DNA and get it typed. And he and I sort of thought about this conversation in advance. It's not the first time I've had it with people, because I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to help him out if in fact, God forbid, he was the person who had killed Lynn Harper. And Steven's a very easygoing chap. Always struck me that way, very calm and composed. And he said, go for it. You've got nothing to worry about. I've got nothing to worry about. You've got nothing to worry about. Go for the DNA and it'll clear me. Now, of course, the DNA had been destroyed many, many years earlier, which didn't surprise me. I would have expected it to have been, but I thought the best way to test Steven's innocence was to present it as if I was sure we'd find it. And it was it worked for me. It meant that from that point on, I was, that first night, without knowing a whole lot about the case, I was convinced of his innocence. And it took 10 years and a week to have it declared, but in August of 2007, the Ontario Court of Appeal finally declared his innocence. In the meantime, I had a son who was 8 years old by that time. And every time I'd see Steven and Marlene, I always had to tell Marlene how my son Truman was. And I have a lot of memories of that too.
10 years and 1 week. That's
Yes.
remarkable. How did your relationship with Steven and Marlene change over the 10 years?
Well, I think, I was perhaps a little harsh that first day because I wanted to be satisfied that I was embarking on a real adventure to be embarked. But over time, of course, we got to know each other very well. And as Ron said, spent a lot of time together. I spent a lot of time in their house. And they spent time in court, of course, when we argued the appeal, because the appeal went for several weeks that we argued it day after day in Osgoode Hall in Toronto. I think by the end of it, we were all very good friends.
We have our first question coming in now from the audience. Lots of comments are pouring in, not as many questions, but wonderful performances. A marvelous love story. The film is so well crafted. So our audience deeply, deeply enjoyed seeing this story told for them tonight. But the question for you, Wendy, how did you balance the film so well? The story of Steven's conviction and the love story. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier of how you chose which components to keep. So how did you find that balance between the crime story and the love story?
Mm-hmm. I mean, Kathy and I struggled with that. And I think part of the reason it took a long time was finding the poetry of it, which means to me, finding that balance. It is a love story. And I think it's an incredible love story. It is a crime story. And, I'll be honest, like we asked ourselves all the time, okay, what is this story about? And Kathy would say to me, is this a love story? And we'd kind of write a draft where that was more the focus. And then it was like, well, it's really about this character, Marlene, who just wouldn't give up. And so there was the character story of Marlene too. And then of course the crime story, which was our biggest struggle. How many facts to put in? And, in the end, I remember now how we decided on them. We picked the ones that were almost, the simplest in terms of kind of showing his innocence, like the car in the field, the night that Lynn was, well, maybe not killed, but she was like she was dead. Like that was a simple one because a lot of it was quite complex to explain in a movie where you only got 90 minutes or 105 in this case. So but we had lines, we chart out the lines. So we had all of those lines, the love story, Marlene's story, the crime story, and we would chart them out and then we blended them. And but it was a craft and it took a lot of time. I don't want to say that it happened in overnight. It didn't. And it happened each draft, we got, I think, closer to the center, which was finding again that character and that driving force of Marlene, who believed so strongly in justice and in truth and would not let it go away.
Next, we have a question coming in from Gary Shantz. This is for you, Kristen, and perhaps Wendy as well. What went into the process of finding your actor to play Marlene? And then Kristen, how did you get involved in the project?
Do you want to take that, Wendy?
Yeah, so why don't we start with Wendy? What was the process like? And then Kristen, how did you get involved?
Bryk had been in another film that I did, who played Steven Truscott. And so I cast him first. And I was looking for an actress, and Steven said, oh, I did this table reading with Kristen Booth. You have to meet her. She's a fantastic actress. And that's how it happened. And then it was like this domino. And then Kristen said, I was in this film with Julia, Sarah Stone, who played the young Marlene, and she kind of looks like me, and she's a wonderful actress. So that literally is how we cast Julia. And then we cast Dempsey Bryk, who's of course Greg's son, to play Steven Truscott younger. And it was just this domino. And I felt really strongly, we had the most amazing crew, and it was the most amazing experience working on this film. And I just felt like it was destiny, which was really weird, because Marlene used to say to me, what happened to her was destiny. She was destined to marry Steven, to fall in love with him and marry him, and do this story and be a person. There was obviously teams of lawyers and James and everyone else, to be the person who said, Steven, you need to tell, this story needs to be told. We're going to tell the truth. And when we tell the truth, we're going to get justice.
So Kristen, what was that experience like on your end, from when you first got approached with the project to the first day of shooting?
It was less than 3 weeks. I'm pretty sure.
Fast.
It was fast. I auditioned, I sent in a tape, found out that I was chosen to play Marlene, and then just buried myself in as many resources as I could to know as much as I could. And then just the weekend prior to shooting was when I got to meet Steven and Marlene. And then Marlene was so generous with her time and her energy and her input. She and I emailed almost every night prior to the shoot day. So I would email and I said, we're shooting this scene. And sometimes I would ask her questions. How did you feel? What was this like? So we kept in contact throughout the duration of the shoot.
So our next question coming in wants to know about the shoot itself. How long did it take to shoot the film? And was there any scenes that were particularly hard to film?
It was probably about close to a 6-week shoot, I guess, maybe slightly less. Actually, there isn't anything that stands out like in terms of hard to shoot, but we certainly had conditions that we were dealing with. For example, this story in truth happened in August. And of course, ideally we would have shot in August. We were also trying to make it look like Ontario, and we were shooting in Calgary. And I can tell you the bike ride scene with the little girl on the bike, it was freezing bloody cold that day. She's in shorts, the brave little thing. We said, well, you can wear pants. No, I'm going to wear shorts and a t-shirt. And you can't see it, but like, it was an extremely cold October. And my terror was, this is supposed to be August. It's not even August, it's fall. And we were dreading snow. So we had to shoot all of the outside, shots first. So all in a row, and just pray that it wasn't going to snow. And what was really hard is, for example, we had a lot of park scenes. The worst thing is if it snows, every park scene has snow. So I think our biggest challenge was weather. And obviously there are other, here's a funny story. The ranch we shot on, which was the perfect location with the bridge where they ride over the bridge and stuff. We found out about 3 days before we shot there was going to be something like 1,000 mooing cows because they were doing something with these cows, something to do with separating them from their children. And I was like, I had to frantically scramble and try and find something else in the city. We never did. We never could. And I don't know what happened. It was another miracle. But somehow, like, I don't know, 2 days before shooting, they phoned and said, it's okay. The cows are going to be elsewhere. You don't have to worry about it, because like we had so many scenes on that bridge, and you know, Lynn Harper's body was there in the fields, and there was so much stuff there. So that was kind of a funny story, because we sort of joked about it, right? Like what it would be like. But anyway, we were saved. We were saved from that.
So Wendy, what you're saying is that you narrowly avoided catastrophe.
Exactly. Precisely.
How do you think it would have changed if they hadn't moved the cows?
We would have had to go with another location, but it wouldn't have worked nearly as well. Like we just didn't. We looked everywhere. We didn't find the location we really need. Like this is an incredible. They do a lot of filming on this ranch. They're used to it. It's an incredibly big ranch. You can have drones. We didn't do any drones on this film because we decided not to, because it was historical. But you can do everything, and you have it to yourself. There's no traffic on those roads. You know, you can shut down traffic without stopping and letting everybody go by. So it's really perfect to have that kind of seclusion. Is a perfect film set.
We are almost out of time, but I think we've got time for one or two more questions. So I want to talk next again to Ryan and James. What was your impression for the both of you when you first heard this movie was being made? And not just being made, but being made about Marlene specifically.
Well, I was talking for myself. I thought it was an interesting and a good way of doing it. You know, you need it was a very good way of doing it, to focus it through her. As has been said a number of times here, obviously an awful lot of the case didn't get shown in the movie, and it just, you couldn't expect it to. But what came through was a very human side of it, looking at a case through the eyes of the wife of the man who suffered so much as a child before she knew him, but not that long before she knew him, and to see how someone can take on a cause. And if you take on a cause and you do it right, you can come out the other end successfully, as she did, because Steven's case was a notorious miscarriage of justice, the most notorious miscarriage of justice in our country, not just in the province of Ontario, but in Canada. And perhaps it's not so inappropriate. You filmed it somewhere up in another province, in Calgary. Another way of remembering that this was a Canadian miscarriage of justice.
Ryan?
You know, so many of the people that are involved in the case are in our lives, like in our circle of family. My parents have a very tight, as you can imagine, we grew up with an assumed name. So, you know, we were pretty protected. And so we had a small circle around. So a lot of the students the people that were involved in the case that were on the road that had to testify, they're all still friends with my dad, and they all still come down, and they're still part of it. So, you know, we have James that we see, him and I see each other periodically at speaking gigs or something, or, you know, at different cases, if we go to be supportive or that kind of thing. And, you know, we see these the people that were involved way back then. And then we have people that were supporters that helped us with postcard campaigns and all of these things. And so all of these people always kept saying, it's, you know, when are they going to tell your story, Marlene? And so it is really kind of a great way that after all of this, you know, when you walk into a room, people naturally navigate to my dad because he's the one that's always been in the news, and he's the one that's always sort of the person there. And people would always kind of push my mom aside. And so this really was something that I think was really needed, so that she could go off with her proper send off for what she's done for Canadian history, because, you know, she's also done a part.
Beautifully said. Thank you. I'm curious to know if you know of any of the other reactions from some of your friends or neighbors or people who were in those campaigns. What did they think of the movie?
Everybody has just been so supportive. We live in Guelph, which is a small community, 130,000 people, and we're obviously pretty well known. I mean, you don't take my dad anywhere. Grocery shopping with him is an hour and a half long project. And especially, it's not bad now because the students are not doing in-person classes, but every year, every law class, when you're in grade 12, you have to take his case. And so we get barraged with, I want help with my project kind of questions. And my parents are always so good to oblige, but they've kind of stopped it all now. But the community has rallied behind them. The people, when the movie premiered at the Whistler Film Festival, the family got barraged by comments on how amazing Kristen and Greg were, how amazing it brought everything together. I mean, it could be very factual, and so it's hard to keep people's interest going. And it was just so well done, even for someone like myself that has lived that road scene a million times in my head, as has James. It's done in a way that, you're kind of moved to, join in along with it. And it's, you get immersed in it and you remember, right, this was about kids back in the 50s. And I can't believe that this happened. And they were going to hang a kid, more today than ever, to see human rights and see what happened just not so many years ago. And to have someone live to tell. I mean, my dad's taking me tomorrow to get my COVID shot. And I think every time I go with him, I ask him about little things that happened to him, because I think someday he's not going to be there to tell me. And it's super important. And he's just happy that for once the spotlight went elsewhere.
And, spotlight on you for getting your COVID shot. Everybody can go do that. It's a fabulous idea. I just got my second one a few days ago, and I'm very excited about it. We have another question for you, James. You've been involved with some of Canada's most infamous convictions. Was Steven Truscott the most challenging just because of how long it spanned and the number of documents there was?
It was certainly one of the most challenging in terms of the amount of work required. In one way, it wasn't as challenging in this sense that when I came onto the case in 1997, there was already public sentiment that Steven Truscott was innocent. I think there'd been public sentiments really since the day of his conviction. There had been a segment of the public who thought he was innocent. Isabelle Laborde, mentioned in the film, wrote a marvelous book in 1966. And no one was really convinced when the Supreme Court of Canada upheld his conviction in 1967. So I felt that I was already on a bit of a wave of support. Now, that doesn't mean that it was an easy case. It certainly wasn't. But most of the cases I embark on, it's very much the opposite sentiment. So it was nice to have that feeling of support coming from the community. And Ryan's very right. I mean, I met all the old school friends of Steven, and they were great. They were all now in their mid to late 50s, early 60s, and they had always believed in Steven. They still did. Many of them came to the court proceedings in the Court of Appeal to watch and to support. Many of them testified as well. And I thought that was tremendous as well. Not just the kids of his age, but also the farmer in whose field or in whose bush Lynn's body was found, Farmer Lawson, a great man for me. And it really was there was a bit of a family affair to this whole case. So in that sense, it was nice, but at the same time, there was a heck of a lot of work to do, a heck of a lot of research, a lot of hunting too, looking for documents.
Speaking of that research and the hunting, Marlene herself in the movie is depicted as finding a lot of the documents and botched evidence that helped with the case. How accurate was that to the real life story?
Oh, it was accurate. When I came on the case, Marlene already had a whole pile of stuff in 1997. She had, and about all the boxes that are talked about, been talked about tonight, but certainly she had a lot of them and gave them all over to me, right? Ultimately, I had to return them all to her. But at the same time, I as counsel, was able to get into archives that she couldn't get into. And that revealed some important information as well. And we got entomology involved, that is insect examination became an important part of the case, and so on and so forth. But don't for a minute, the film's very right in terms of the work that Marlene did, her importance to the case. And of course, I think by far the most important thing is that she helped carry Steven through it, and Ryan through it, I'm sure, and the other members of the family. Ryan's brother and sister, I'm sure she played a huge role in keeping their spirits up, because 10 years, I'm sure in those 10 years, they often said to themselves, is this guy Lockyer ever going to do anything for us? Is he ever going to achieve anything? And I see Ryan grinning when I said that. But they never said it to me, I'm glad to say.
I will say too that, so the funny thing was is that James, when James came on, so Jane is actually, obviously you can tell he has an accent, he's British. And so he didn't grow up here with all the folklore of the case. And the people, as some of the Canadian lawyers that were born here kind of grew up with the case and had to take it in law school and that kind of thing. And so that actually was a bit of a benefit, because he kind of came at it with this, like, I don't have any of the background, so let me research and figure it out. Whereas some of the other lawyers had already come in with sort of a preconceived and had seen what was going on. So James had a really unique perspective in that way.
You were mentioning how many grade 12 students have learned this in a class of theirs. I was watching the movie with my fiance last night, and she was explaining to me how she was reviewing this story in grade 12 and how great this is a way to introduce the story to people who haven't had that in classroom experience.
My group, my class, I was away the day they picked what cases they would do, and my group picked my dad's case. And I had to go in and tell the teacher that, sorry, I couldn't do that, because at that time the boards weren't allowed to discuss it while the Truscott kids were in school, because we lived in a nursing name, and the teacher didn't believe me. So I actually had to bring my parents in after class and have them kind of say, this is who we are and you can't really do this. And so it was kind of, it was one of those strange things that, like, I had the best guest speaker ever and couldn't use him. We did for his grandson, for Jeffrey, and I think James will remember Jeffrey, our nephew, he got to bring my dad in for the guest speaker, him and I think one of the other grandkids, and that was it. And I think he's retired from public speaking now. But
wow, that's
actually have, my brother's kids are the first kids going to school as Truscott.
Wow.
So it's a really, we've had this full circle moment in Guelph, and they're beloved and protected really well.
So it's taken 60 years, but at long last, the Truscott name is back.
Truscott name is back. Yeah, and they both have beaten health issues in the last 2 years. My dad had 2 strokes last year. Mom had a heart attack and colon cancer that she beat this year. And so they're just like, they're these 2 strong forces that have, moved forward. And so having this movie come out this year too has just been, beyond our wildest dreams. So.
Ryan, we are so grateful to you and your entire family, not just for what's happened in the last year, but that you have given the right to share this story through these artists to make it possible. And what fabulous detail for what's happened to you guys recently too, to have that as context as we are learning about your family story, some audience members for the first time. Speaking of time, we are very nearly almost out of it because we are over time. But before we go, I'd like a short answer just from both Kristen and Wendy. Ryan brought up a great point that this is the first time there's a perspective of Marlene's story being part of this. So if you could answer in 1 or 2 sentences, both of you, why do you think it is important that we are telling this story, not just telling it, but telling it through Marlene's eyes?
Well, her story was untold. It was untold in history, but she was a part of history. She helped to make history. And, I just want to say thank you to Marlene. Thank you for letting us make this film on you, for sharing your story. And here's why I think Marlene's story is so important, because every person who's listening in here can make a difference. They can fight for justice. They can fight for truth. Maybe they're not going to do the big thing Marlene did, but you can do that on a daily basis. When you hear lies, when you hear untruth, when it needs to be dug in the darkness, you can do that personally. You can be an every person, as she was an every woman who did a remarkable thing.
So
Well said. Kristen?
I don't know really how to top that. That was beautiful, Wendy. I just think that, I said this in an interview the other day. I think there's something to be said for the commitment and the tirelessness that Marlene brought to clearing Steven's name. We live in a society now where, we want things instantaneously. We want, this has to happen now, and I want my Starbucks now, and this, and people freak out when they don't get things right away. And this, for her, this fight, this journey was over 40 years long, and it just is. I think she's a national hero. I really do, and I just think that it's about time her story was told, because as Wendy said, she is as much a part of this history as Steven in a way.
Well, I think you couldn't have said it better, Kristen. This is very much ingrained into Canadian history. And tonight we have had such a great chance to live through it again, both through the film and through real life. So to all of you, to Wendy, Kristen, James, Ryan, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for making the time to be part of this evening. What a really special chance to talk about the story, the movie, and the life tonight. So all of you, thank you for making time to be part of this evening.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Also, thank you to Wendy Donnan, our executive director, and Tori, technical producer extraordinaire. We are so grateful to them, and to you, our audience, for joining us this evening. If you liked Marlene and would like to vote for it for the Audience Choice Award, that is a new feature of OFFA this year. Down below at the bottom of the screen, make sure you've clicked the title Marlene on the side. You can rate the film here, and all those votes will be collected to choose your favorite movie of the 8th Annual Oakville Film Festival, with those award winners being announced on Wednesday, July 7th. Don't forget, we have lots of other great events over the next 6 days. Tomorrow is day 2 of the festival. At 5 p.m. is First We Eat, and at 8 p.m. is Lorelei. My co-host Alita Rose will be hosting both those events, but we have lots of great titles, features, documentaries, and shorts all week long for OFFA 2021. On behalf of everyone else, my name is Tyler Collins. I've had the pleasure of being your host tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Good night, everybody.
Bye.